Okay, just welcome to Woman on IT Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hacks Delivered will be by our guest Chiyedza Heri. Topic: biodiversity loss and declining yields, rethinking sustainable development. Episode 135 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my motto, and empathy is critical when you're working on biodiversity loss and declining yields. Let me mention a couple of things that's been happening in the world of technology. Congratulations and good luck to the University of Malta lecturer Claudia Borch on hosting the European Association for Computational Linguistics this March 17th until 22nd at Hotel Radisson Blu in Malta. Best of luck, Claudia. And very, very important announcement. Next week, you should join us for our special episode, this International Women's Month. We will be discussing unleashing the power of women to impact the future. We want you to be part of it by sending us your 1 minute or less inspiring advice video for the next generation of women, or just tune in next week to join into this very inclusive conversation with 5 female leaders from all over the world. The theme is Impact the Future. Think about how you are impacting the future. And again, join our conversation next week. Save the date. Now, let's go back to our topic, biodiversity loss and declining yields, rethinking sustainable development. Can we feed the future without harming the planet? Food crisis or food revolution? Our food systems are under threat, but there is hope. In this episode, we explore sustainable solution with Chiyedza Heri, founder of Ubuntu Alliance. Join us, ask your question, and as this Zimbabwean entrepreneur and speaker ignites a conversation on rethinking development for abundant harvests and a healthy planet. Chiyedza, where in the world are you today joining us from?
Hello, good evening. So I'm joining you from Zimbabwe. I'm based in the capital city, Harare. However, I get to engage with farmers all around Zimbabwe and also regionally and internationally.
Excellent. And what brought you to this very trendy topic?
Oh, it wasn't trendy 10 years ago, I'll tell you that. So I'm a farmer's daughter, and it's actually been a very interesting journey. I studied biomedical science. My parents were hoping for a doctor, but then I thought, why do we wait for people to get sick before we intervene? So I started looking at the environment because a lot of the diseases that we have are non-communicable diseases, and they're linked to environment and diet. And that got me very interested in our food production systems. And when I came back to Zimbabwe from after studying in England, I had the opportunity briefly to work with our apex body for horticulture. And there was a worrying trend where our exporters were seeing declining yields, like significant. You're looking at 18 to 25% reduction in yields. And I was just like, we need to do better. We've got some value chains where we have close to 40, 50% food loss waste. And all of these things started making me think that, our current way of producing food is not very sustainable. There's a lot of wastage. And this is where technology is exciting, because by increasing access to information and data to farmers, we can help optimize their productivity but also collect information and data from farmers to unlock alternative financing options for them.
Right, as a farmer's daughter, you like to mention that. I'm wondering because I'm actually not a farmer's daughter. However, I was raised with a mother who would sew in her spare time. So she would sew beautiful dresses. And during communism, as you can imagine, we didn't have access to much shopping. So I had to rely on her artsy. Abilities. However, she always warned me never go into sewing business because it's hard labor and it doesn't give a lot of money. So I'm wondering, how did your family's background impact your choice of the career?
I think it's influenced it quite a bit because my parents are export horticulturists, and by studying abroad and having an appreciation of the value chain, it makes you appreciate how interconnected we are. And then it also makes you start to realize that, do we really need strawberries 365 days of the world of the year in some places? So I think it's impacted me very significantly because even though I was studying biomedical science, I had an understanding of the practices on the ground happening. So when you look at some of the ways, in the 90s, it was the production moved very much into increasing yields. But from the health perspective, we were focusing so much on increasing yields that we started seeing declines in the nutritional value of some of the fruits and vegetables that we're growing. So again, from the medical side, it was looking at our food production systems and saying, maybe increased yield at what cost?
Mm-hmm. And so you came in and you decided to improve the yields and work on the future of food revolution. Now, I'm wondering, do we have a crisis or is it a food revolution? What evidence supports the optimistic outlook? Or maybe it should be more pessimistic outlook?
So currently, I would say that when you look at some of the science and the data, one of the things I say is there's a lot of moving parts within crop production, but your key ingredient when you're starting is you have to look at soil. And globally, well, regionally on the continent, only about 5% of farmers are getting their soils tested. So your soil is like your blood. There's no way you can grow healthy food if you don't have healthy soil. So I always say, starting with the soil, because that the healthier the soils are, the better it is for the environment, but also the more nutrients end up in the plant. So it's also a win-win. It's good for the environment, but it's also good for our health as people.
It is good for our health and for our future. There are, however, some factors that could impact it apart from the quality of the soil. What are the other factors that you work on?
So it's looking at with productivity, when there's small things like just by improving your pH, you can increase your yield by up to 3 times. Then when you look at some of the irrigation practices, some farmers are using overhead sprinklers when we know that it's more water efficient to have drip irrigation. So it's educating and saying this is how you can reduce some of your costs, but maximize on your impact, maximize on your revenue. So we know that like right now, since the conflict with Russia and Ukraine, fertilizer prices have been going up. And also when you look at something like fertilizer, a plant only absorbs 15 to 20% of fertilizer. So what happens to the rest of it? Some of it is now being converted to nitrous oxide and it's going into the environment. And then you also have leaching into the waters. So again, by reducing our fertilizer application or optimizing it, we can also have that reduction in cost for the farmer, greater return on investment, not just on financial return, but also environmental return. And then when you look at the soil, everyone focuses on the macronutrients and the micronutrients. We're now getting a greater appreciation of the biodiversity in the soil. Like there are millions of microbacteria, but it's not like an exciting space for people to think of biodiversity, because people are typically thinking we want to protect indigenous species. The big five are more attractive and there's more funding for it. Imagine going and saying, I'm raising money to improve soil microbiology. But things like earthworms and the ecosystem-based services, like we're getting a greater appreciation of the role that soil plays in regulating our water cycle.
Regulation water cycle. So let our viewers understand what is the biggest crop, what is the main crop that is at the moment currently in your country, and how does it compare, for example, to European Union, where we were launched in Malta. Not necessarily maybe in Malta, but I'm wondering, how does it compare in terms of biodiversity or developments into maximizing the crop?
So I think farmers are getting a greater appreciation of the need to reduce the pesticides, because I think in the 90s, people were really focusing on the chemistry of production. But when you look at agriculture, at the core of it, it's a biological science. So having healthier soils, more biodiversity, you also have more, when you spray less pesticides, you have more pollinators. Like I think it was in 2022, British farmers saw almost an 18% reduction in their berry yield because of a loss of pollinators.
Yes, and then all of a sudden, even hotels would have their own fields with flowers on the roofs, just to help the pollinators, to attract them into cities and really help the biodiversity. We have seen also quite a big movement since pandemic into growing our own fields. And I have to say, because I'm tuning in from TCI, Grand Turks and Caicos Island, which is a small island with a very small population of 50,000 people, maybe maximum 55,000 people. So they did have a huge problem during the pandemic, because they could not get their food supplies. So I'm wondering, was it also impacting your country? How did you cope with supply chain during the crisis?
So during COVID, I was working with, so I think domestically we had significantly enough food, but we did have issues with supply and for some grain. So Russia and Ukraine, we get quite a bit of grain, wheat in particular from there, as well as some fertilizer. So I think the COVID helped open our eyes to how we were reliant on systems that were inefficient. I think we all had to become a whole lot more efficient. And then it also helped certain industries rethink their value chain or rethink their business models. Like some farmers were only focusing on export horticulture. And now you don't have passenger aircraft. The freight planes are prioritizing and earning more money from transporting vaccines. So it really did push people to innovate and rethink their business models, which I think is one positive that came out of COVID.
Oh, absolutely. Another positive I want to mention, for example, we've seen these reels and stories on Instagram, Facebook, all these social media platforms, showcasing how governments are encouraging people to grow in their small gardens, and how to, for example, in Belgium, we probably, many of you viewers heard about Belgium offering 3 hens to help with food production, with egg production, and also it minimized the scrap production. So it really had a huge impact on biodiversity as well as on sustainability. So a small change like that can definitely move the nation. Now, Chiyedza, let's go back to what you are focusing on. What does your day-to-day activity entice?
So my day-to-day activities at the moment, I was looking at the opportunities for our farmers to tap into alternative funding, such as climate finance, impact finance, and carbon financing. And so my day-to-day in the last couple of months has been focusing on building the digital infrastructure to allow farmers to improve their record keeping so that they can monitor and verify and basically meet the reporting requirements, whether if they access impact funding, they can integrate, it's like a farm management software that integrates with sustainability reporting that can be integrated with carbon digital MRV. So my day-to-day has been engaging with partners to help build that, sharing lessons and knowledge with other countries. Like Kenya is a bit more ahead. They've got quite a few soil carbon projects, quite a few solar irrigation carbon projects. And I'm quite excited with the carbon space because when farmers aggregate, we always say that teamwork makes the dream work. So when farmers come together under one, they get the economies of scale that can help them to aggregate their generated carbon credits, or they can reach the minimum ticket sizes to then access climate funds, which, a smallholder farmer or even a medium-sized farmer will have a ticket size too small to access a climate fund by themselves. But if you aggregate the funding requirements, then you can unlock finance to incentivize farmers to then adopt better agronomic practices and in some cases, increase their sources of revenue. So it's been a lot of research into the different methodologies around carbon credits that are applicable to the agricultural value chain, understanding. We're also developing our carbon framework in Zimbabwe. So it's engaging and saying, how can we model and what is a fair, equitable benefit share? What help is there to help remove some of the bottlenecks so that we can have a truly inclusive carbon market?
Now, can you explain the concept of carbon credits? What is that? Because majority of our viewers are leaders in the field of technology, so maybe 101 experience from your side, how it is looking with some story, could make this topic more accessible to our viewers.
So, a carbon credit is basically a ton of CO2. And you find that a lot of countries made commitments at the Paris Agreement and have nationally determined contributions. So there's two different markets. There's a voluntary market and a compliance market. So explaining a little bit about the voluntary market, a private sector company like a bank in New York, they can invest in energy efficient lights, double glazing, cycle to work schemes, but their carbon emissions are always going to be more than they can sequester. And a lot of businesses are being quite proactive in, their CSR, being environmentally friendly, making commitments to net zero. So if you are always going to have your emissions too high, an organization or a business, typically in the global north, can then purchase a verified unit of CO2, which is developed using a methodology which is like a set of instructions to help measure how much carbon is either avoided from being emitted or stored. And through that's the basics of carbon credits. And it's a subsector, or it's a tool under climate finance that helps funding be directed from the heavy polluters to people at the forefront of the effects of climate change.
Fantastic explanation. I hope everybody's clear on that. It's a way of companies to mitigate their emissions by purchasing credits in the carbon market. Now we have a question from Agata Bellon fascinating discussion, ladies. These solutions so far sound pretty simple. Are they also affordable for farmers, even in emerging markets?
So some of the solutions aren't at the present aren't accessible. So, bringing in renewable energy, access to irrigation is still a challenge, and there are a number of farmers that are still relying on rain-fed agriculture or integrating cold supply chain into some horticulture value chains. But this is where I get very excited about carbon credits and climate finance, because sometimes they make what would otherwise be an uneconomically viable intervention become economically viable. So an example is we have in some areas farmers facing a 50 to 60% loss on their tomato crops. Now there's with VM46, with Vera have a methodology on food loss waste. If we have a baseline and we know how much is being thrown away and we know how much CO2 a ton of tomatoes emits, then this is where the project developer comes in, identifies a problem, establishes a baseline, and then from the emissions being avoided, a community or an irrigation scheme can then, with the assistance of a project developer linking them to the carbon market, purchase and install critical infrastructure that can optimize their production.
My goodness, there is so much jargon that I think any farmer would just give up at the start of our discussion. But let's face it, what does the average farmer need to take as a take on? Do they need to join the Ubuntu Alliance to understand more, or to have this intermediator from you, or can they do something on a daily basis that is simple and easy to do every day, but improves their crops or their return on investment?
So it's been quite interesting educating farmers about the carbon market, because you get to the end of a 40-minute discussion and you have a farmer shaking their head and they're saying, Chiyedza, you're telling me people in Europe are buying air?
Mm-hmm.
So I think so one of the things that Ubuntu Alliance is doing is helping with that training, capacity building. But most farmers have an association in the secretariat. Farmers just want to farm. So it's just getting the key people to understand, then break it down into farmer to say, there's this that's available. This is how we can make it work. But this is your part and this is what we need from you. And then this is where I think in the short term, we will be needing civil society and independent third parties to come in to make sure that you have an ethical benefit share, because regrettably, we have seen within the carbon space, businesses take advantage of information asymmetries and people entering into carbon projects not fully understanding what they're signing on.
Absolutely, because all they want to do is just have an easy life and make sure that there is nothing hanging over their heads, like, for example, a lot of paperwork. Does it require a lot of paperwork?
This is where the project developers come in, and this is their value add, that the project developer can just focus on the implementation of our and do the reporting to link the farmer to market. And this is the importance then of the tech sector within digital MRV. So a farmer is already, day-to-day operations inputting how much diesel did they use, how much fertilizer did they use, how much pesticides did they use, how much water did they use. And that data is already being collected. So now with the Ubuntu Alliance, what I'm working on is collecting the relevant data for different methodologies. So it's not an extra headache or burden to the farmer, but it facilitates the right data for them to monitor and verify a project should a farmer co-opt to join a project that's being developed.
Beyond traditional methods, are there any innovative technologies or practices that hold promise for sustainable agriculture?
Precision agriculture is a very exciting space. And I think we are going to see a growing emerging field of ag tech entrepreneurs. Because as I said, farmers just want to farm, but the technology space has a lot of potential in helping facilitate precision agriculture. So we have drone specialists that can come in and spray your crops, to spec. You have a lot of interesting new technologies with GIS mapping that can help farmers see, identify from an aerial view problem areas, which can then help them zone in and say, what's wrong with this section of my field? You have technology that can help farmers manage the non-arable parts of their farm, and from there measure, or if they want to start rewilding, there is innovative soil testing technologies out there as well, which are accelerating the rate and speed of which the turnaround times of soil testing. Like, there's so much within the agricultural technology space. It is exciting. And I think the new green skills, that's something I think we need to work together to showcase that at the convergence of technology and agriculture, there's a lot of exciting opportunities. I always say there's a lot of space. Not everyone is a farmer, but within the agricultural value chain, there's a potential for a lot of people to get involved.
So you say new green skills. What are the new green skills? If you could give us a couple of examples.
So within the new green economy of looking at sustainability and, dealing with, circular economy, reducing our pollution, reversing the biodiversity loss we're experiencing, there's a lot of new, job skills that, increasing access to renewable energy. All of that, I would quantify them as jobs within the green economy that help us accelerate the rate at which we meet our nationally determined targets or become more sustainable. So whether it's infrastructure development, agriculture, there's a range of new jobs that are coming up with the accelerated rate of countries making commitments to move to a more circular economy.
Circular economy, you also mentioned emissions. So how does sustainable agriculture contribute to mitigate these emissions and address climate change? Give us some examples.
So nitrous oxide is a lot of people are focusing on carbon dioxide, and it was quite interesting that at the recent UNEA 6th General Assembly meeting, there was a big focus on nitrogen and making nitrogen more visible across the agricultural chain. So precision agriculture, reducing food loss waste, improving optimization of logistics and access to market. We have a lot of farmers that sometimes grow produce just hoping someone would buy, but by strengthening those linkages, then we can optimize how much food loss waste we end up having. And so there's a lot that falls within the green skills that can help agriculture be more efficient, effective, and sustainable.
Now we have another question from Agata. How capital effective can this smart ag tech be? Are drones cheaper than, for example, GIS map to tractors, and as John Deere kits is widely expensive?
John Deere is like the Rolls Royce of tractors in the agriculture sector. But there are some specialist companies that are using, I don't know what brand they're using of, but they just, offer a service of going and spraying fields. So the nice thing about that is if you're using a drone versus a tractor, you're using less diesel. You can spray a smaller area more efficiently. You can get to the corners of the field, and you just have someone focusing on that part. Now, the farmer doesn't have to own the hardware. So they're just renting a service. So I think we are going to be seeing, and we are seeing more innovative models. Like in Kenya, they've got an innovative model of Hello Tractor where farmers have access to mechanization and the shared economy. Like, we have Uber. Not everyone has a car now, because why own a car and have to deal with the maintenance where you can just rent it when you need it? So I think the services sector within the agriculture sector is going to become, so it's a growth area, especially for smaller power tools for smallholder farmers. So there are technologies that can be contextualized for smallholder farmers, for larger farmers, and fit the pocket of each of the different types of farmers.
Now, what are the biggest problems of farmers in Zimbabwe?
So we have quite a bit of spot marketing, and with our local horticulture, and I think that's one of the drivers of food loss waste, and then the ease of accessibility to soil testing. So, and this is a challenge that is across the continent. In Zimbabwe, 80% of our soils in a survey done in 2021 were highly acidic, 60% poorly depleted. And I think people take it for granted that soil is not a renewable resource. Then access to information and data. The traditional model of transferring knowledge was having a demo plot, and then people would be trained that, do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But anyone who has a farm or has exposure to farms will know that you cannot do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and replicate it across a large mass, because every soil type is going to be different. The altitude is going to be slightly different. So I think we will be seeing we need to move to a more empowering farmers to experiment and say, these are the parameters you can play with, so that each farmer can find what's right for their field.
It's fascinating because there are still so many traditional tools that can be replicated, because as you mentioned, in the 90s everybody went into chemical fertilizers. Now we are back to the nature-driven fertilizers, and I have to say that I read with excitement the fact that even though the soils in TCI are quite poor, I've been experimenting with the help of seaweed. So I did a little experiment creating seaweed tea, and it turns out that it's really nutritious and it works beautifully. And I'm wondering, can you do such experiments on a bigger scale, because it usually involves a lot of work, and it takes time to really make this experiment successful.
And I think this is where I appreciate and I like the fact that when you go, it's very rare to see a farmer operating in isolation. Even at village level, ward level, county level, provincial level, farmers are always constantly knowledge sharing, and we need to always have that cooperation, collaboration, and knowledge of exchange of, okay, I tried this, it's working. Because the reality is, even though it's a noble profession, most farmers are typically at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to the supply chain. When they're selling to a market, they typically have the lowest profit margin, so they have to be as efficient as they possibly can be. And I think farmer to farmer, every farmer knows the struggle. Especially the last couple of years, we have had quite a few number of bad rainfall seasons. Right now we have an El Nino year, so we have poor rainfall, and it's just looking out for each other and in the spirit of Ubuntu working together.
Great, and your alliance is helping with that. Now, so it's interesting that you say that farmers help each other. However, isn't it part of competition kind of mindset of, I should not help others because that means my crop may end up being sold quite cheaply?
So on the flip side to that argument is, if you do not have critical volume, then you cannot have economies of scale, and you have lower bargaining power. So there's also strength in numbers as well, and working together.
Excellent. I love that will end up definitely as a quotation. Now, Chiyedza, I love economies of scale. I love the fact that you're helping farmers. How long are you planning to get involved in the field, and what's next for your efforts?
So phase one is closing the data gaps. I was looking at it, and a lot of farmers struggle to speak to finance because of that integrity of data and the requirements of financial institutions, impact funders, climate funders. So that's stage one. But in the meantime, it's also starting to build a network of potential alternative funders to then help farmers speak finance and finance speak farmers.
Finance in terms of getting carbon emission initiatives, or finance in terms of banking, what kind of mechanism you see there?
So impact funding, climate funding, carbon financing, like a full range of alternative funding. So there's a lot of funding out there. People want to finance people moving and incentivize people moving to more sustainable practices. But one of the weaknesses we have is on the meeting the international reporting standards.
What is the problem with meeting these standards?
So as you said, with farmers, they just want to farm. So now when they see this, ESG or impact or sustainability reporting, it becomes sometimes a bit overwhelming. But if you can present it and say, look, you're already doing these practices, you're already Global Gap certified. This is the information that you already are capturing day to day as part of your operations. Let's move to getting you from the stage of let's make your data work for you so that you can access some of this concessional climate finance. That's the end game, is getting money into the hands of farmers, especially climate finance, because farmers are at the forefront of the effects of climate change. And for every dollar that has gone to adaptation, 10 has gone to mitigation. So we need to get more money into adaptation. Otherwise, we're literally going to reach a point where we're not going to have enough food.
And how is the government helping you? Is there any help from the government? I mean, from the Ministry of Agriculture, or do you work alone?
So I work quite collaboratively with Ministry of Agriculture, and more recently I've been working quite closely with Ministry of Environment, Climate and Wildlife, because it feels like sometimes, one line ministry is working on environmental policies and they're not aligned with agriculture. So at the one hand, we're saying we want to, increase our tobacco production. Tobacco needs trees. And at the same time, Ministry of Environment is saying we want to reduce our deforestation. So there have been some policy misalignments, but I think we're getting more alignment in it. But so we do work quite collaboratively as private sector and government and some of the apex bodies for farmers. So it's building that ecosystem to say, how can we unlock this opportunity so farmers can be more resilient in the face of climate change, and invest in infrastructure such as, drip irrigation, moving to solar so that they're not having to rely on diesel generators or motors to pump water, and just decarbonize our agricultural value chain.
That's amazing that we still talk solar, and especially in a country like Zimbabwe, where you have how many days of sun?
I think it's easier to count how many days of no sun.
Absolutely, but still people are rather not investing in solar solutions. Why is that? Is it too expensive?
So for our traditional banking institutions, the number one, we have high interest rates. You're looking at, 15 to 18% interest rates per annum. And then the typical average tenure of a loan is 12 to 18 months. Most farmers won't be able to pay for that. So there is a gap in medium to long-term funding. However, when you look at how much diesel some farmers are using month on month, it's like if they can just get, and this is where I'm really saying we need to unlock climate finance, because then we can leverage medium to long-term funding to then help farmers switch to something that is going to reduce their cost of production, but also have a positive environmental impact.
So now it's probably your job to encourage Ministry of Finance to chip in.
So I wouldn't say it's my job. I think it's a collective effort to say, and it's exciting now because post COP28 and the global stocktake, a lot of governments around the world are looking at their NDCs, revising their nationally determined contributions, and we have engagement. So I am seeing that there is more collaboration between the different line ministries, and there is an accelerated engagement with private sector, which I hadn't been seeing in the past. So there is a concerted effort of people are seeing that we've got a crisis, and I'm seeing that people are putting aside differences to say we need to find a solution to move forward.
Now, how can successful models from Zimbabwe or from Africa be applied to other regions facing food security challenges?
So I think for Zimbabwe, we actually have a very strong extension network. We have, so within government, we have agri-tech extension officers that help with last mile information sharing. Then we also have, some industries have outgrower models where they help, like the dairy industry are quite good in it. And the tobacco, I know people don't like talking about tobacco, but they're also quite good in assisting and aggregating farmers. So I think the more farmers aggregate their production, it optimizes things like the logistics. Now you don't have 10 farmers going to a market, you have one truck going around to 10 farms to collect, and you're sharing the cost of one vehicle. So I think the coordinated production, and I think in Kenya, they have cooperatives. So as I said, around the world, you're seeing that farmers coming together helps in terms of giving them economies of scales and reducing some of their post-production costs.
Excellent. We have some questions from the audience again. IPOV, in Patrick's opinion, Patrick Young is asking, so is the funding predominantly NGO based, or how is it working?
So right now, a lot of farmers are self-financed, or we have value chain financing where there's contract farming models. Farmers will be contracted to buy, and then they use those contracts, or they get inputs, and then the money of the inputs is deducted when they sell their crops. So contract farming is one of the biggest ways that farmers are funding their production, or it is self-funding.
Fascinating topic for discussion with IPOV. I can sense Patrick wants to invite you to his channel, which is solely focused on finance, financial technology, or stock exchanges. Now we have another question from Agata Bellon. Given the enormous amounts of fallow land the world over, is it really fair to suggest we will run out of food unless we follow this approach?
It's a good question. If you are speaking on the fallow land, like I know that 60% of arable land that hasn't been farmed is sitting in Africa. Do we want to continue clearing land, as in cutting down trees to access some of this fallow land, or is it better for us to optimize what we have with? So that I think that's some of the debates that we're having, that one of the biggest drivers of deforestation is clearing land for agricultural production. And then on the soils that we have, I wouldn't say that there isn't a one size fits all, but there is a concerted general consensus that we do need to rethink our food production systems, especially when you think of the amount of chemical fertilizers, pesticides that we're putting in, and you're seeing a greater interest in reintroducing, effective microorganisms and finding other ways to boost yield without compromising future generations' ability to provide for themselves.
And what is your biggest pain point, Chiyedza? We talked about the access to finance. Is there anything else that you would like our audience to spread the message to and reach out to some cooperatives?
So I think there's a lot of solutions, especially technology-driven solutions that can leapfrog Africa in terms of improving our precision agriculture, helping farmers become more sustainable, delivering last mile service delivery for services such as soil testing, foliar testing, water testing. There's a lot of innovations that are being spearheaded by Africans in Africa, but I always find that it's very difficult for African entrepreneurs to raise funding for their projects. So, like I was looking at Kenya, I think in was 2022, their startups received about 1.8 billion in startup funding. But when you narrow down the statistics, only 6% of that funding went to local Kenyans. And it's a pity because you're thinking that surely the local Kenyans would have the greatest understanding of the problems that their communities face. So this disparity in funding for African entrepreneurs, it is a bit of a worrying trend.
So why is this trend happening? Is it the knowledge that is not really with Kenyans, or why do they only get 6% of this financing?
So on the one hand, I think the what's it called? The one report which was done on Jedi investing was looking at it, and it looks like, they coin it expat bias. And then when you're looking at expat bias, does an American know more about the macroeconomic, microeconomic, socio-cultural intricacies of a country? So I'm a little bit not convinced on that. Then there's also the gender disparity in accessing startup funding. We all know that women typically get less startup funding, even though there have been studies shown that on average, a woman will get, women founders typically have a 35% increased return on investment. When you invest in women, they are typically more cash efficient with their operations and their businesses. When you have a diverse team of both, gender parity within a team, it's, you have a greater problem solving capacity and capability. So I struggle to marry the data and where the money goes.
We struggle as well. However, hopefully by having this channel and also spreading the knowledge and letting others tune into our podcast and our live stream, we can highlight this problem and make a positive change. Now, I wanted to bring a great quotation. Biodiversity starts in the distant past and it points toward the future. Franz Lanting says, I'm sorry, it's another expat bias. I'm not bringing really any quotations from Zimbabwe. However, maybe you could help me on this one.
So we have there's a proverb that we have, and it says, "Kutsva kwendevu varume vanodzimurana," and it means that when a man's beard is on fire, you put it out. And I feel like right now we've got a triple plenary crisis. We have a lot of pollution, we have biodiversity loss, we have climate change. Now is not the time to be pointing. I think in previous COP negotiations and discussions, we've been focusing on, but you're polluting and you need to pay this. Now is the time to act now, ask questions later. Like, we need to seriously accelerate the rate of implementation of interventions, because it is like right now when you're driving around Zimbabwe and you see, and it's Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, with the drought year that we're having, this is like a climate risk and a disaster that's coming. And so we need to be investing in interventions, because if you have 3 countries that have a massively reduced capacity to produce their own food, that's a national disaster.
Mm. Well, lots of talk, no action. We've seen it over and over. We talk a lot about International Women's Day, and we talk about access to finance, we talk about gender parity, and there is very little action because bias is sitting very pretty in all these all male panels and manels, as some people are calling, and so on and so on. Now, as individuals, what actions can we take to support a more sustainable food systems?
As individuals, I think we need to also, you can have a great impact outside, but I think we also need to start looking at, what am I doing in my sphere of influence? That's a good starting point, because sometimes you'll be like, well, what can I do? And I think even, a lot of small actions replicated by a large number of people can have a massive impact. And then when it comes to, I think it's starting small, starting just with yourself and saying, what's in my sphere of influence that I feel comfortable that I can implement and execute. And then it's supporting each other. So things like this give, this platform to be able to share. There's a lot of ways, but we all have different gifts, so we all bring different things to the table.
Diversity definitely helps, diversity of thought, whether you are bringing your knowledge in technology fields or in leadership or agriculture. You are here to solve the problem because the biggest problems are shared problems, the ones that nobody owns, but everybody is affected by. Now, as we are heading towards the end of our show, Chiyedza, I wanted to ask you, what is the number one book you can sit and think, oh, I wish I read it before I started my career?
So there's a book. It's called Power. I'm trying to forget the name of his first name. Something Green.
Yeah, it's
I
a
wish I
Robert Greene. I'll help you on
Robert
that
Green.
one.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much. I wish I had read that before, because I think I went to one of those schools that sort of, it was a bubble, and I felt like everyone, we're all going to sing Kumbaya, and you leave school and we're all saying we're all in this together. Then I realized that that is not how the world is. You have to understand the landscape and understand how to navigate it. Um, but hopefully without losing your values and what you stand for in it. But power is not given, it is taken.
taken and controlled today by Chiyedza. I have to say it was a very powerful discussion. Agata wanted to clarify that she's against deforestation, not suggesting deforestation, she says, as the reserves of unused land for grains, example, Ukraine, former Yugoslavia alone are huge. The deforestation issue is separate, and I agree, a travesty. And she also says, thanks for great discussion today. IP of it, Patrick says, thank you, Beata, for the discussion. It's a real alphabet soup for farmers out there. Thanks, Chiyedza, for explaining the complexities here. With the VICFOS announcing a metals exchange this week, do you think Zimbabwe and Africa overall need more agri-commodity exchanges to help farmers? That's a very exchangey question for you.
I'll say value chain finances and agri commodity exchanges 100%. So in Zimbabwe, we do have the ZMX exchange, which is focusing on agriculture. But I think for the different types of value chains, whether it's an annual crop, which you have a turnover every 6 months, or an annual crop, a perennial, or a plantation crop, different crops have different financing requirements. So we need to map out and explore more value chain focused financing. I look at a country like India, and India has the smallest yield gap between their commercial farmers and their smallholder farmers. And then I was looking at what is their formula for success, and they've got a large mix. One of the things is They have special agri funds that help their farmers get inputs on time so that they plant on time. And planting on time massively affects what yield you're going to get. You can reduce your yield by close to 50% by planting too late.
Planting too late, but it's never too late to ask you for your life lesson quote, Chiyedza, and how did it change you?
My life lesson quote, I would have to say that, fail forward. That's something I learned in university. I've grown up in a society where failure is laughed at, but I've learned that there's no such thing as a failure if you've learned from it. Like my first business, I had a tea company in England, and like I didn't succeed. I had a tier 1 entrepreneur visa. It was a bit of a flop, but one thing I learned is having a product when you have a business is not enough. You need to have figured out your distribution or have an ecosystem around it. And I think all of the failures along the way have led to what I'm creating now.
Fantastic. Well, that's something I did not know about you, Chiyedza. Now, let's imagine that you could meet anyone in the world and have a private breakfast anywhere in the world. Who would you meet and where would you take them to?
So I would choose a gentleman by the name of Walter Harriet. Walter Harriet was my mentor during university. My first business plan that I ever wrote was for Zimbabwe Indigenous Medicine. And I remember we had like a startup incubation center, and I went with my business plan, and I was a biomedical science student, and I was like, I'm going to invest in, I'm going to build a research, pharmaceutical research company. And most people would have looked at like a first year biomedical student and completely exploded in laughter. But, with a straight face, he said, okay, so how are you going to do that? Let's expand on. And he taught me how to pivot. So I pivoted massively from what I thought I was going to be doing almost 10 years ago. And it would be great to just, have a coffee at a cafe in London, I don't know, by Oxford Street, and just catch up and say, yeah, this is what happened since that Zimbabwe Indigenous Medicine business plan.
So speaking of cafes and pivoting, I think it's time for me to quote Eleanor Roosevelt, who once said, "Women are like tea bags. We never know our true strength until we are in hot water." So in life, how are you brewing, Chiyedza? How are you in hot water?
I think you get maximum flavor.
That's surmise our today's discussion, Chiyedza. You surprised me immensely, because I did not expect that a farmer's daughter would have such an entrepreneurial spirit and puts together a nation to create sustainable future. And that's it from episode 135 of PhD Livestream. Thank you, Chiyedza, for your interesting insights into Zimbabwean and African and global economy and agriculture. To stay updated and ensure you never miss Positivity Hack delivered, follow Women on IT and turn on notifications to be alerted once a video has been released. Once again, next week we have Women on IT International Women's Day celebration, and we will be talking about unleashing the power of women to impact the future. Thank you so much to our lovely audience, Agatha Bellon and Patrick Young, who participated and asked questions. As always, our positivity quote comes from Positive Thinking Only and goes, "Look for something positive in each day, even if some days you have to look a little harder." And finally, as Maya Angelou says, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. Today is your day to hack the future and change your future as well. Thank you.